Here is the headline of the most recent news on the international scene. Does Biden's $2 trillion plan to rebuild infrastructure and stop climate change go far enough? Biden's fast start. Do his first 100 days really matter? Hypocritical, hilarious Ox says calling border crisis a surge invokes white supremacy. We need U.S. leadership on water security to combat COVID-19 globally. Biden follows and improves Trump's China policy, but he needs to scrap their shared infatuation with Xi. Americans fear China over Russia. No, Putin will not help at UN on Syria. Russia's prison service defends treatment of Navalny. Suez Canal shutdown is a lesson for naval powers. Myanmar protesters urge guerrilla strikes as internet blackout widens. UK regulator found total of 30 cases of blood clot events after AstraZeneca vaccine use. US to brief Japan. South Korea on North Korea review. Suspected Italian spy gave Russia highly confidential material, source. Taiwan train derails. At least 4 dead, many injured. The News Alerts, Podcast Media. Today live April 2, 2021. Latest world news headlines and events. Does Biden's $2 trillion plan to rebuild infrastructure and stop climate change go far enough? If implemented, President Joe Biden's new American Jobs Plan would rank not only as one of the biggest engines for creating good jobs, many of them in construction, which average about $30 an hour, but also as the nation's most ambitious effort so far to curb greenhouse gas emissions and put the country on a path to net zero carbon emissions by 2050. The plan covers a lot of ground, including $174 billion to boost electric vehicles and shift consumers away from gas-powered cars, funding 500,000 charging stations by 2030, along with incentives to buy electric vehicles and funds to retool factories and boost domestic supplies of energy-saving materials. There's $100 billion to update the electric grid and strengthen it against climate disasters. Hello, Texas? Money to retrofit millions of homes with solar panels and better insulation, with a special focus on low-income and minority communities vulnerable to climate change because they're likely to live in fragile dwellings and in places hard hit by floods, hurricanes and wildfires. Oh. And $16 billion to employ oil and gas workers to cap wells and reclaim coal mines by curbing leaks of methane. And another $10 billion for a civilian climate corps to employ people to restore land. It would also replace all of America's lead pipes and update water systems to ensure drinking water is safe. And more. It's an important step in the right direction. To be more accurate, I should say lots of steps. And yet, I hate to sound like an ingrate, particularly after spending 4 painful years watching former President Trump dismember environmental initiatives already in place. But I've got to wonder whether Biden's plan is big enough. I even wonder whether the whole is greater than the sum of its many parts. In truth, Biden's new American Jobs Plan has a kind of pray and spray quality to it, as if put together by a committee of publicly spirited people, each of whom had their own view of what must be done for the environment, infrastructure and jobs. Each had a good idea, which was incorporated into the plan, but the ideas don't exactly cohere. Lots of new initiatives here without a single all-encompassing transformative end. There's something for almost everyone, even including the Business Roundtable and Wall Street, which have somehow managed to preserve a big part of their Trump tax cuts. Which raises a host of questions. Why isn't Biden simply repealing the Trump tax cut? Why isn't he touching the giant incomes and humongous personal wealth that have ballooned at the top, since it's almost all public investment which will grow the economy? Why concede that it needs to be paid for with tax increases in the first place? As the economy grows, it should pay for itself by reducing the debt as a portion of the total economy. Note to Democrats, don't ever again allow Republican supply-siders to claim dynamic scoring on tax cuts. Dynamic scoring is far more appropriate for public investments. Biden had vowed to spend $2 trillion over 4 years to transition the American economy to net zero emissions. Well, this plan won't do it, by a long shot. And it falls way short on his promise to decarbonize the electricity sector. So the question I'm left with is, why such a modest proposal? I'm sure Senate Republicans have been telling Biden to rein in his ambitions, especially in light of he'll still have to run the gauntlet of the Senate parliamentarian and Senator Joe Manchin, Democrat, West Virginia. So why not $3 trillion? Why not 1 million new high-paying construction jobs? Why not a total repeal of the Trump tax cut plus a tax hike on the super-rich? Why not a green revolution? Maybe it's not bigger because there's another big one coming, Biden's American Family Plan, focusing on needs like accessible child care, early childhood education and free community college, and he wanted to save some room. Yeah, time is running out even now. Much of the public thinks the pandemic is over and the economy is mending, losing the sense of urgency Biden needs to get more done. And don't forget the For the People Act addressing voter access and election integrity, which is going to require every bit of political capital he can muster, and may be the most important initiative of all. Don't get me wrong. I'm thrilled with Biden's plan, as far as it goes. As I said, it's lots of steps in the right direction. It just doesn't go far enough. It's a good deal for America but not a big deal nor even an exceptionally good deal. Frankly, I was hoping for more. Biden's fast start. Do his first 100 days really matter? We're a little over halfway through the first 100 days of Joe Biden's presidency. During this time, our new president has produced a flurry of executive orders and a significant $1.9 trillion piece of recovery legislation, in addition to the usual appointments made by incoming presidents. Biden seems to be making the best use of his first 100 days, with striking actions and bold proposals on a number of issues. Is it really important that he acts so quickly on these issues? Or is the idea of the importance of a presidency's first 100 days a relic from days preceding our hyper-partisan modern politics? Presidency scholars often refer to the first 100 days of a president's term in office as the honeymoon period, a time of exceeding goodwill for the nation's newly elected president. The president's party is firmly behind him. Fragmentation over policy disputes is likely to happen later. The opposition party is in disarray following its losses. The press is willing to give the new guy a chance, and there are no scandals yet to probe. It is also at this time that the president can claim a mandate for his agenda, that the result of the election signals that the American people have elevated him to office for the purpose of implementing specific reforms. And importantly, this is the time during which the president's popularity is usually the highest. Research shows that these beneficial factors help a president to be more successful in dealing with Congress than at other times during his term. There are other factors at work that give Biden significantly more opportunity than his predecessors to accomplish his policy goals. As counterintuitive as it may sound, presidents have more opportunity to take action when the economy is poor rather than when it is doing well. During a time of economic crisis, people look to the president for leadership that promises a way out, and this gives the president significant leverage in enacting his economic agenda. Other crises, particularly foreign ones, can result in a rally around the flag phenomenon that also benefits the president's position. While the coronavirus pandemic was certainly politicized by former President Trump and other Republicans, the fact remains that the president is the singular symbol of leadership for a nation in crisis. And deference is paid to his agenda for responding to it, which can help with other initiatives. See the various policies embedded in the recent American Rescue Plan. Biden has indicated that he learned his lesson from the response to the Great Recession of 2008. The American Recovery and Reinvestment Act was insufficient to the task of stimulating a quick recovery, and the economy continued to lag years after it was enacted. Certainly, Biden is concerned about the course he is charting for the nation. Just recently, Biden hosted a group of historians at the White House to get perspective on the crises facing the nation and his place in its recovery. So, what will it be? The president has signaled that he is interested in moving expeditiously on other pieces of landmark legislation, including infrastructure, particularly costly, gun control and immigration. Should he move boldly and decisively, or should he be concerned about risking a backlash by moving too fast? The first 100 days is often seen as a time when a president could garner some help from the opposing party, especially before the opposition becomes emboldened by its usual gains in midterm elections. But, with the exception of some appointments, Republicans in Congress have been unified in their resistance to Biden. It will likely not get any better as these members turn their concerns to potential primary challenges in 2022. These hyperpartisan divisions mean that Biden's first 100 days matter even more for him than for previous presidents. Overwhelmingly, presidential opportunity declines over the course of a term in office. History shows that a backlash is coming whether Biden moves boldly or not, and our hyperpartisan climate will only make it worse. The 100-day clock is ticking, and the time for action is now, because Biden will likely not get such an opportunity in the future. Hypocritical, Hilarious Ox says calling border crisis a surge invokes white supremacy. This is not a surge. These are children, and they are not insurgents, and we are not being invaded. Which, by the way, is a white supremacist philosophy. The idea that if another is coming in the population, that this is an invasion of who we are. That's Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's DNY latest WTF moment on Instagram, which is breathtaking even for the same person who once said during the Trump years that unemployment was low only because everybody is working 2 jobs. which isn't how unemployment numbers are calculated. So let's unpack this latest verbal masterpiece by quoting the most popular member of Congress. From a social media perspective, in 2019, when a surge decidedly smaller than this one was happening at the border under the previous administration. The child detention camps are here. I confronted the border officers myself. Using their names, I told them exactly what they are responsible for. One of them made eye contact with me. I spoke directly to him. I saw his sense of guilt. We can dismantle this, Ocasio-Cortez declared in 2018 while calling migrant facilities concentration camps. She also used the opportunity to visit the border for this infamous photo op. Fast forward to 2021, and with Democrats completely in control, suddenly the Congresswoman can't seem to find the time to visit the border to take more self-promotional photos. She also can't bring herself, much like the Biden administration, to call this border crisis a border crisis, instead arguing that it's an imperialism crisis, it's a climate crisis, it's a trade crisis, and also it's a carceral crisis. OC doesn't have a monopoly on immigration hypocrisy, though. I will also immediately put in place a meaningful process for reviewing the cases for asylum. Kamala Harris, and a presidential candidate, declared in 2019 during a primary debate. I will release children from cages. I will get rid of the private detention centers, she added. In a related story, candidate Biden urged migrants to surge the border during the same debate. Well, now here's her chance to follow through on those promises now that President Biden has tapped her to fix the situation at the border. Of course, this task will be exceedingly difficult for Harris, who once compared ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, to the Ku Klux Klan while arguing that illegal border crossings should be legal. I know what crime looks like. I know what a criminal looks like who's committing a crime. An undocumented immigrant is not a criminal, Harris told KCBS in Los Angeles in 2015. She has not wavered from that position. Similar to Ocasio-Cortez, Harris can't seem to find the time to fly down to the border as the crisis deepens. It's an odd use of time regarding what should be a top priority. Because how does one address a crisis without seeing firsthand what the conditions on the ground are like? Would speaking to border officials dealing with this be a good idea? And if Harris is seeking diplomatic solutions here with other Central American countries, when is that trip happening? Because the White House, again, can't provide a definitive date. How bad are things getting at the border? CBS News reported Tuesday night that one facility in Donna, Texas, was an overcrowded purgatory and holding 17 times more people than what the facility was built to hold. Also, per the Associated Press, the Biden administration for the first time Tuesday allowed journalists inside its main border detention facility for migrant children, revealing a severely overcrowded tent structure where more than 4,000 people, including children and families, were crammed into a space intended for 250, and the youngest were kept in a large playpen with mats on the floor for sleeping. Add it all up, and approximately 18,000 migrant children are currently in U.S. custody. This marks the highest number of children in migrant facilities. Dubbed kids in cages by candidate Biden and babies in cages by candidate Harris, since the government began making this data public. Acknowledging that this is a crisis is the most basic step one in truly addressing it. But Ocasio-Cortez won't say it is, instead somehow playing the race card from the bottom of the deck by invoking white supremacy. She also won't visit the border for another viral photoshoot and surely won't broach concentration camps again. It's a Democratic administration in the White House, after all. An administration that can't even bother to assess in person what has become, by far, its biggest crisis of its own making. We need U.S. leadership on water security to combat COVID-19 globally. Water is essential for curtailing COVID-19, for climate adaptation and for economic growth, all of which the U.S. President, Cabinet and Congress have committed to tackling. Global water security is the one issue pivotal to initial and sustainable progress on all these fronts, and assertive U.S. political leadership is long overdue. The water connection to COVID-19 is clear as a clean pair of hands. Vaccine or not, the COVID-19 pandemic is not over, nor is it the last infectious disease epidemic. Sustainable access to safe drinking water, sanitation and hygiene WASH, helps prevent the spread of dozens of costly and deadly diseases. Far beyond the day when billions of people will have finally received a COVID-19 vaccine, the simple and cost-effective act of washing one's hands with water and soap will remain out of reach and key to preventing the spread of COVID-19. Cholera, Ebola, sepsis, antibiotic resistance and some 20 neglected tropical diseases. Hand washing is the best defense where personal protective equipment is sorely lacking and social distancing is challenging across Africa, Asia, and Latin America. But 2 billion people across middle and low-income countries cannot wash their hands at home, school, and unbelievably, in healthcare facilities. The benefits of getting ahead of the next disease outbreak clearly accrue both to developing countries and back here in the United States. Less obvious may be the impact of a changing climate, often realized through too much water and not enough. As the U.S. government carves out a stronger leadership role, it is well advised to do so in ways that contribute to developing countries' efforts to adapt to erratic climate conditions through water policy. Sustainably designed and implemented water programs are essentially climate change adaptation programs as well. The consequences of a changing climate hit the poorest families, communities, and countries across the developing world hardest, and that impact is worsening. By increasing the resilience of families and communities, the health and economic returns from those water programs will be clear immediately and for years after the ribbon cutting. Water security also gets us ahead of a multitude of threats of national and global proportions, including preventing infectious diseases from becoming outbreaks, preventing overuse of antibiotics, leading to deadly antibiotic resistance, preventing droughts from becoming famines that also increase refugee flows and instability, preventing violent extremist organizations from gaining strongholds by weaponizing water, a tactic successfully deployed by ISIS in Iraq and Syria, and Boko Haram in and around Nigeria. Water security clearly merits inclusion in the U.S. national security strategy typically drafted in the first year of the U.S. president's term, because a lack of water poses national security threats and because water security offers preventive solutions. This is a pivotal year in which the U.S. government has a number of important opportunities to coordinate its policies, programs, and budgets to elevate and better resource vital global water security efforts. In November 2020, the U.S. National Intelligence Council transmitted a memorandum on global water security to Capitol Hill, outlining many of the threats posed by water scarcity. Water security has strong bipartisan support, and Congress can and should increase the funding levels and provide heightened oversight for global water security efforts. The recently launched Congressional International Water and Sanitation Caucus offers an important new education and oversight mechanism. As mandated by the Senator Paul Simon Water for the World Act of 2014, the National Security Council will begin drafting the next global water strategy this year. Over a dozen federal agencies are part of this strategy, many of whose efforts could be better coordinated by the potentially powerful but underutilized Interagency Water Working Group led by the U.S. Department of State and the U.S. Agency for International Development, you said. USAID needs to continue to strengthen the links between its water and health teams. And if USAID and the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, CDC, can partner more effectively on WASH and global health programming, this would significantly increase the impact on global health and emphasize the silent P in CDC, prevention. We have to stop with inadequate and temporary fixes of one incoming water-related or water-magnified crisis after another. We've got to minimize the risk of the next crises while stopping the bleeding from the current ones. Heightened U.S. government leadership on global water security provides just such an opportunity, and the incoming administration is well positioned to lead on this crucial global challenge. John Oldfield is a principal at Global Water 2020, a nonpartisan, 3-year advocacy and facilitation initiative designed to accelerate progress toward water access and security for all people in developing countries. Biden follows and improves Trump's China policy, but he needs to scrap their shared infatuation with Xi. President Biden's first press conference last week offered both reassuring and concerning insights regarding his administration's approach to China. Biden did not mention the contentious meeting in Alaska where Secretary of State Antony Blinken and National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan confronted China's top 2 foreign policy officials. The Americans implicitly affirmed the Trump administration's direct pushback against Communist China's repressive domestic governance and aggressive international behavior. Foreign Minister Wang Yi and State Councilor Yang Jicki had explicitly demanded a return to the Clinton and Obama-era policies. Biden said after the meeting he was proud of Blinken's performance, and he used the press conference to recount how he had expressed the same concerns to Xi Jinping. He said he warned Xi that, working closer than Trump had with allies and Democratic partners, which the State Department said included Taiwan, we are going to hold China accountable to follow the rules. Whether it relates to the South China Sea or the North China Sea, or Taiwan, or a whole range of other things. The president said he also gave Xi a strong human rights message. As long as you and your country continues to so blatantly violate human rights, we're going to continue, in an unrelenting way, to call to the attention of the world and make it clear what's happening. And he understood that. I made it clear that no American president, at least one did, but no American president ever backed down from speaking out of what's happening to the Uyghurs, what's happening in Hong Kong, what's happening in country. That's who we are. The moment a president walks away from that, as the last one did, is the moment we begin to lose our legitimacy around the world. Biden contrasted Trump's performance to his own several other times, even employing sarcasm. God, how I miss him, but his extensive comments on China overshot the mark in several respects. First, he failed to distinguish between Trump's reputed personal indifference to the plight of the Uyghurs, Hong Kongers, Taiwanese, and Tibetans, and the Trump administration's actual human rights record on all those issues. Through the use of punitive sanctions, administrative actions, scathing official statements and speeches, and congressional legislation that Trump unhesitatingly signed, his administration instituted policies that went far beyond anything done by any previous administration to combat China's malign behavior on security, trade, and human rights. That is why Beijing made clear its strong interest in the end of the Trump tenure, and why Yang and Wang angrily accosted Blinken and Sullivan before and during their meeting. Biden also misspoke by conflating Xi with the Chinese people when he said, "You and your country continues to so blatantly violate human rights. It would be convenient to dismiss the reference as a slip of the tongue," and that he meant you and your communist government, but something else Biden said at the press conference, and has stated on earlier occasions, suggests that he sees the China threat as broader than the communist government. More societal or cultural, I pointed out to him. No leader can be sustained in his position or her position unless they represent the values of the country. By that reasoning, given Xi's unquestionable sustainment in power, he must be reflecting the national values of Chinese society. But, in a quasi-totalitarian system like the People's Republic, unlike a democratic society, the leaders rule not by reflecting the values of the people but by imposing the interests of the ruling party. As Mao said, political power is won not by the consent of the governed but by the barrel of a gun, or as Biden might put it, by the example of their power, not the power of their example. Surely, Biden did not intend to defame the Chinese people by suggesting they applaud what Xi's regime is doing to the Uyghurs, Tibetans, Hong Kongers, and threatening to do to Taiwan. But, he sounds almost Trump-like in describing Xi as very straightforward. Doesn't have a democratic with a small bone in his body. But he's a smart guy. Both U.S. presidents readily concede Xi's status as a world-class tyrant. During the campaign, Biden called him a thug. Yet, neither Biden nor Trump was able to resist an almost awestruck response to the very ruthless qualities that make Xi so successful at oppressing his people and threatening the international order. It is not unlike Henry Kissinger's fawning over mass murderer Mao Zedong and Zhou Enlai. Biden says, "The thing that I admire about dealing with Xi is he understands. He makes no pretense about not understanding what I'm saying any more than I do him suggesting a meeting of the minds." Biden has often touted his unparalleled personal relationship with Xi. "I've known Xi Jinping for a long time. Allegedly, by the time I left office as vice president, I had spent more time with him than any world leader had, because President Obama and the Chinese president who decided we should get to know one another, since it was inappropriate for the President of the United States to spend time with the Vice President of another country." It turns out that was a bit of a misstatement as well. In September 2015, Obama said this in the Rose Garden, "I want to once again welcome President Xi back to the White House. We first hosted him here 3 years ago when he was vice president. So this is our 6th meeting." More important than the frequency and attendance at the Obama-Xi and Biden-Xi meetings and telephone conversations is what they accomplished for China's relations with America and the world. Biden said that during their most recent 2-hour talk we made several things clear to one another, and Biden listed his own admonitions to Xi. But what did Xi make clear to Biden? The same no compromise, no concession ultimatums Wang and Yang gave Blinken and Sullivan? Or, did Xi assuage Biden's concerns as he did Obama's when he promised not to seize the territory of America's Philippines security ally or militarize the South China Sea? Or, when he assured Trump there was nothing to fear from what his own government originally called the Wuhan pneumonia or Wuhan virus and no need to halt air travel from China? Trump denied he had been duped by Xi. Obama displayed similar credulity. Biden needs to follow the clear-eyed approach he, Blinken, and Sullivan espouse. As Blinken's predecessor Mike Pompeo put it, distrust and verify. Americans fear China over Russia. While a war of words dominated the headlines following the meeting between U.S. and Chinese officials in Alaska this month, it's time for a conversation about where things go from here. A new national security strategy document released by the White House focuses on the growing rivalry with an assertive and authoritarian China, the only competitor of the United States capable of mounting a sustained challenge to a stable and open international system. As the administration looks toward next steps in the U.S.-China relationship, Officials should take strength from the fact that the American people support a policy that confronts and competes with Beijing. A recent survey finds a growing consensus on China among the American people. A national public opinion poll commissioned by the Ronald Reagan Institute shows that a strong plurality of Americans, 37%, regard China, for the first time, as the country posing the greatest threat to the United States. This is more than double the number who named Russia, number 2 on the list, as their greatest foreign fear. Nearly 10 years after President Obama's pivot to Asia, public opinion has shifted, and swiftly. As recently as 2018, the same survey found only 21% identified China as the greatest threat, with Russia at the top of the list with 30%. Americans also have a sense of how they want the United States to deal with China. Significant bipartisan majorities support maintaining overseas bases to deter threats and respond quickly to events. Now, more Americans say that the U.S. military presence should be focused in Asia rather than the Middle East. The survey shows strong support for the administration's emphasis on allies and partners. Indo-Pacific nations most critical to U.S. competition with China are viewed favorably, with a healthy majority identifying Australia, Japan, South Korea, and Taiwan as allies. Notably, when it comes to burden sharing, more Americans believe that our Asian allies in the Indo-Pacific do their fair share compared with our European allies in NATO. Seoul indicated earlier this month that it will increase its share of the cost of stationing U.S. troops on Korean soil by 14%. True to President Reagan's own legacy, the survey also reveals that Americans are concerned about China's human rights violations, in light of the brutal crackdown in Hong Kong and the genocide against the Uyghur people. It's not hard to understand why. Over 70% of Americans want the United States to support the pro-democracy movement in Hong Kong, even if it angers Beijing. Yet concern over China does not translate into a unified approach on how to engage the threat it poses. As President Biden pursues collaboration with the Chinese on climate change, he should remember that only a very slim majority of Americans support re-entry into the Paris Climate Agreement. Americans are similarly divided over whether climate change is, of itself, a national security threat. As you'd expect, there is a highly partisan divide on this issue, with 75% of Democrats believing climate change is a national security threat compared to only 24% of Republicans. Americans are clear-eyed about the full range of threats we face from China and support American engagement and leadership in the region. Administration officials should channel their concerns and, together with our allies and partners in the region, lead from a position of strength. As President Reagan once said, "War comes not when the forces of freedom are strong, but when they are weak. It is then that tyrants are tempted." No, Putin will not help at UN on Syria. Diplomats will soon meet in New York at the UN Security Council to renegotiate the terms of the cross-border humanitarian assistance to Syria, specifically the reauthorization of relief via Resolution 2533, set to expire in July. Informal diplomatic moves have already begun this week when State Secretary Tony Blinken chaired a UN Security Council meeting on the humanitarian situation in Syria. Formal discussion on the resolution may start in May. The role of Russia, a key backer of Syrian dictator Bashar al-Assad and a permanent council member, is critical. In private, some policymakers believe the Kremlin can be convinced to be less obstructive this year than in the past. Such optimism is unwarranted. Moscow will continue to push for Moscow's own interests in these discussions, and to that end, empower Assad. The Syrian tragedy, one of the worst humanitarian disasters since World War II, is now in its 10th year. To date, the conflict took well over 500,000 lives, led more than 5 million to flee the country, and created the world's largest internally displaced population. The Assad regime's brutality, along with sheer negligence and criminality, ensures the humanitarian situation remains dire. Last year, UN Security Council made painful compromises on humanitarian assistance to pass the cross-border resolution. After 2 Russian and Chinese vetoes, the Council agreed to allow one crossing for UN aid at Bab al-Hawa between Turkey and Syria's Idlib province, a crossing under Assad's control. 2 other crossings had to close: Bab al-Salam, on the Syrian-Turkish border, and al-Yarubia, on the Syrian-Iraqi border, controlled respectively by anti-Assad rebels and U.S.-backed Syrian Democratic Forces, SDF. Russian officials claimed Assad is effective at controlling cross-border assistance and that Western sanctions, rather than Assad, is responsible for Syria's humanitarian disaster. By accepting only the Damascus-controlled border crossing, Moscow further enabled a humanitarian catastrophe and pushed the UN to take another step toward legitimizing Assad. Having made this gain, the Kremlin merely abstained from the final vote because Western countries blocked 3 of its other proposed amendments, which would have only further bolstered Assad and the Kremlin. Moscow's actions last year were not a one-off, but entirely consistent with years of unwavering diplomatic cover for Assad, with regard to humanitarian assistance into Syria. Russian officials consistently stated since July 2014, when the UN Security Council authorized provision of transborder aid, that it is an emergency temporary measure that should be rolled back as more areas come under Assad regime's control. Ever the champion of international law, Moscow often reiterated that its position is based on principles of state sovereignty and consent of the affected country outlined in the UN General Assembly Resolution 46/182. Of course, Moscow never acknowledged that Assad, who starved, gassed and bombed his people into submission, is accused of war crimes and responsible for Syria's humanitarian disaster in the first place, brutality that has long since placed him, and the Kremlin that supported him, in violation of international law. Since last July, Moscow has shown no indication that would be any more helpful this year on cross-border assistance. In the backdrop of changing American administrations, more Russian forces moved into Syria. And in February, Russia's permanent representative to the UN Vasily Nebenzia said the Kremlin saw no reason to renew the existing transborder mechanism if we were to make the decision tomorrow. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov's trip to the Persian Gulf this month only lends further support to Moscow's intent to stick with Assad and consolidate Russia's influence. At a press conference following a meeting with his Turkish and Qatari counterparts, Lavrov said, "We emphasize the importance of providing urgent humanitarian assistance to the Syrians. But illegitimate Western sanctions against Syria's lawful authorities stand in the way of this assistance, along with reconstruction of Syria." As in the past, he stressed that Western sanctions, not Assad, hurt the Syrian people, as he added that Syria's return to the Arab League would play a stabilizing role in the region. Of course, in Moscow's vision would include acceptance of Assad. Moreover, Moscow likely hopes it can persuade Persian Gulf countries to fund Moscow-backed reconstruction in Syria in a manner that would circumvent sanctions. Most recent Russian proposals to open 3 crossings from Assad regime territory into Idlib, the last remaining rebel stronghold, will only allow Moscow to argue that the aid line from Damascus works and there is no need for cross-border aid provision and further empower Assad to subdue Idlib. Too often policymakers and analysts resort to wishful thinking with regard to Vladimir Putin's Russia. Last April, a series of articles in the Russian press, unusually critical of Assad, had raised eyebrows and perhaps gave Western officials false hope. The articles ended as quickly as they began. A year later, it's clear that whatever their aim, Moscow has no intention of fundamentally changing its course, no matter the depths of Assad's depravities. Whatever hopes policymakers may harbor this year, they misunderstand Moscow's wider foreign policy objectives globally. And in the Middle East, Putin seeks to erode the US-led global order. This is why he sticks to the letter of international law, but not its spirit. In the Middle East, Putin wants to be seen as a regional peacemaker and loyal partner, unlike the West, so he cannot abandon Assad. Yes, Moscow wants a resolution in Syria, but on its terms. This week, Tony Blinken appealed to common humanity at the Security Council, as earlier Russian airstrikes hit a hospital and gas facilities in northwest Syria. Western leaders can be sure Moscow will not be a good-faith negotiator. Deferring to ambassadors at the UN this year will only lead to more painful compromises in the face of Russian vetoes for which there is little recourse. Instead of keeping this issue compartmentalized in New York, policymakers should look for building leverage and link assistance to other issues. Pressure and increased costs, not concessions, work with Putin. Leaving humanitarian assistance to his mercy will only lead to more suffering. Russia's prison service defends treatment of Navalny. Officials at the Russian prison where Kremlin critic Alexei Navalny is being detained have defended their treatment of the opposition leader after he complained of interrupted sleep and lack of proper medical attention. Correction facility officers strictly respect the right of all inmates to 8 hours of uninterrupted sleep, the prison said, according to Reuters. Navalny is being provided with all necessary medical care in accordance with his current medical conditions. Navalny said the facility holding him, called IK2, had guards waking him up every hour and would not address complaints about leg and back pain. The Russian opposition figure began a hunger strike on Wednesday in an effort to obtain medical attention. "I have the right to call a doctor and get medications. They give me neither one nor the other. The back pain has moved to the leg. Parts of my right leg and now of my left leg have lost sensitivity." Jokes aside, but this is already annoying, Navalny said, according to CNN. Navalny's lawyers have found a doctor to see him and are waiting for a response from the prison. "We're waiting for a decision from the prison service," Alexei Baranov, the doctor who would see Navalny, told Reuters. Navalny is serving a 2.5-year prison sentence on what he maintains are trumped-up charges. Russia convicted him for violating his parole after he went to get medical treatment in Germany after he was poisoned last year, allegedly by the Russian government. President Biden has implemented sanctions against Russia for the jailing of Navalny. Suez Canal shutdown is a lesson for naval powers. After 7 days, the MV Ever Given has been freed from the Suez Canal. The container ship had to be refloated and maneuvered off each canal bank, then it had to transit the remaining length of the canal. Fortunately, high tides assisted the dredging process. Without this good fortune, refloating the ship could have required removing its 18,000 shipping containers, adding several days to the operation. The Ever Given blockage has, at first glance, primarily economic implications, and the cost was staggering. 12% of global trade transits the Suez Canal each day, including 1 million oil barrels and 8% of the world's liquefied natural gas. The canal itself lost $15 million each day of the blockage. More broadly, the blockage creating a backlog of nearly 500 cargo ships interrupted $9.6 billion of trade each day. That totals approximately $67 billion, just slightly less than the gross domestic product of Luxembourg, Bulgaria or Ghana. The effects on global supply chains and container availability could last for months. The West relies on financial instruments and services industries to sustain its economic growth. The trend is so intense that a child born not too long after the millennium could be forgiven for not owning a physical bank card or carrying any hard cash, paper currency. Previously hated and hoarded in equal measure as a stand-in for gold or silver, may disappear in parts of Europe and North America, at least for the middle and upper classes. But our electronic world still runs on things. The wealthiest individuals in the West accrue capital through financial manipulation. They create value by employing sophisticated arbitrage tactics and predicting share prices, reaping the added monetary value of their maneuvers. Nevertheless, people still must be fed and clothed, still must live in houses outside of the Western middle and upper classes. They must commute to work. It is therefore of extreme importance politically, not simply economically, to understand how goods travel between nations. The Suez Canal is a testament to human ingenuity, that is, to man's desire to shape his environment and increase his production. Its construction began in the 1850s, but attempts had been made before. The canal became a global economic fixture after Britain coerced Egypt into its sphere of influence in 1882. The canal allowed European shipping to cut off weeks to months of transit time by reaching the Indian Ocean through the Mediterranean, rather than transiting around the Cape of Good Hope. After 400 years of European exploration, colonization and imperialism, the British Empire finally ruled the gate to Asia. With this gate, and its naval supremacy, Britain established a secure supply and communications route between India and the home islands, while ensuring its stranglehold over European-based trade. Global economic conditions, of course, did shift. The United States and Japan became formidable economic and then military powers, asserting independent interests and shifting the global productive center of gravity away from Europe. The Suez Canal nevertheless retained its importance, particularly after the discovery of Near Eastern oil in the early 20th century. No modern power is autarkic. It is therefore a core interest, a unifying interest among great powers to ensure freedom of the seas. Hence the importance of the Ever Given incident. The Ever Given incident was a freak accident, most likely caused by human error and technological malfunction. But it demonstrates the ruinous damage that any disruption to international trade can cause. And for those nations that wish to hold world power, it demonstrates the necessity of controlling critical maritime lanes. What a single grounded tanker did with extreme imprecision, a fleet of warships could do with discrimination. By holding a central choke point like the Suez and denying transit to enemy ships, a nation can point a dagger at the heart of its adversaries' economies. The Suez is an equally tempting prize to Russia and Iran. Both have overextended their capabilities, hoping to gain a marginal advantage in their ongoing shadow wars. The former against NATO, the latter against Israel, Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates. Egypt is a U.S. ally whose regime survives due to American diplomatic and Saudi political support, but this relationship could change with a sea change in Near Eastern politics. Prompted by American policy shifts, a major regional war, a revolution, in short, any number of foreseeable events and black swans. Russia has established a presence in the Levantine Basin, supporting Syria and partnering with Iran for tactical purposes and extending its influence to include Libya. In a broader crisis, for example, in the Baltic, the Suez could be an ideal pressure point upon which Russia could push. Similarly, a Near Eastern cataclysm would give Russia, in partnership with Iran and perhaps even Turkey, pretext to interrupt the Suez's maritime traffic. Of course, dealing such intentional, ruinous damage to another nation's economy likely would be a pretext for war. And Russia and China's political military elite remain unsure of their military capabilities, untested as they are. But the United States and its allies must recognize that the goals of its adversaries point toward aggressive action, that international choke points like the Suez are prime targets, and that, absent effective deterrence, these adversaries will decide the benefits of local maritime primacy far outweigh the risks of warfare. Americans must recognize that their prosperity and security has stemmed from not simply a secure global commons but, more particularly, a U.S. military that can deny an adversary maritime access and defend trade in all situations but wartime. The ever-given disruption was temporary and bloodless. The next disruption in global trade may be far different. Myanmar protesters urge guerrilla strikes as internet blackout widens. Myanmar activists held candlelit protests overnight and scrambled to find workarounds for a new internet shutdown on Friday, as opponents to the military's bloody crackdown on dissent vowed no let-up in efforts to unseat the ruling generals. Anti-coup groups shared radio frequencies, offline internet resources and providers of text message news alerts to try to circumvent new curbs on the internet, which now limit web access to fixed-line services only. The military did not announce or explain its order to telecom firms to cut wireless broadband, which adds to a ban on mobile data through which a nationwide movement has mobilized on social media and spread images of the junta's lethal suppression of mostly youth-led protests. Late on Thursday, protesters spread a call for a flower strike at bus stops where demonstrators killed by security forces had departed on their last journeys. "We will leave flowers at bus stops tomorrow, that's what I want to tell you guys before the internet is down," Kin Sadar, a protest leader, posted on Facebook. In the following days, there were street protests. "Do as many guerrilla strikes as you can. Please join. Let's listen to the radio again. Let's make phone calls to each other too." The former British colony has been in chaos for 2 months following the military's overthrow of Aung San Suu Kyi's elected administration, which has sparked anger across towns and cities and reignited hostilities between the armed forces and ethnic minority insurgents in several different regions. New charges of violating the Official Secrets Act were filed against the Nobel laureate, her chief lawyer said on Thursday, the most serious so far, on top of 2 comparatively minor offenses. Breaches of the colonial-era law are punishable by 14 years in prison. The charges were filed against 3 of Suu Kyi's deposed cabinet ministers and her Australian economic advisor Sean Turnell, who are among hundreds detained in the military's sweeping crackdown on opponents since it took power, alleging fraud in an election swept by Suu Kyi's party. Lawyer Min Min Soo said Suu Kyi looked in good health during a video hearing on Thursday, but was unable to tell whether the ousted leader, the figurehead of Myanmar's decades-long fight for democracy, was aware of the situation in her country. "We will not surrender." Protesters were in the streets in several urban centers day and night on Thursday, where some burned copies of the military-drafted 2008 Constitution. Media reported 2 people were killed, including an 18-year-old man, as police opened fire to quell gatherings. Kithit media reported shots were fired at a protest during the night, where 400 troops were present. The report could not immediately be verified. Some 543 people have been killed in the uprising, according to the Association for Political Prisoners, AAPP, advocacy group, which is tracking casualties and detentions. The military has repeatedly said those killed had instigated violence. A video shared widely on social media late on Thursday showed an unconscious man being kicked and beaten by a group of 7 helmeted, uniformed men with rifles, who dragged him face down along a road before carrying him away. Another image shared widely showed an overhead view of hundreds of candles arranged on a road in the darkness, forming the words "We will never surrender." Britain on Thursday sanctioned one of the military's biggest conglomerates, following a similar move by several Western countries. Britain's Next became the latest high street brand to suspend orders from Myanmar's factories. The Myanmar military has sunk to a new low with the wanton killing of innocent people, including children, British Foreign Secretary Dominic Raab said. The UK move was welcomed by his US counterpart Antony Blinken. Myanmar's Asian neighbors, which it relies on for trade, have not imposed any embargoes, but some have moved beyond measured language after the military killed 141 people as it marked Armed Forces Day on Saturday. Neighbor Thailand on Thursday said it was gravely troubled. Stronger positions on Myanmar have been taken by the Philippines, Malaysia, Indonesia, and Singapore, the top diplomats of which are meeting separately this week with Chinese State Councilor Wang Yi in Beijing. In a transcript of an interview made available late Thursday, Singapore Foreign Minister Vivian Balakrishnan expressed dismay at the bloodshed. "We are alarmed and appalled at the escalating violence," he said, adding China's Wang Yi also hoped for an end to violence and for dialogue. UK regulator found total of 30 cases of blood clot events after AstraZeneca vaccine use. British regulators on Thursday said they have identified 30 cases of rare blood clot events after the use of the AstraZeneca COVID-19 vaccine, 25 more than the agency previously reported. The Medicines and Healthcare Products Regulatory Agency said it had received no such reports of clotting events following use of the vaccine made by BioNTech SE and Pfizer Incorporated. The health officials said they still believe the benefits of the vaccine in the prevention of COVID-19 far outweigh any possible risk of blood clots. Some countries are restricting use of the AstraZeneca vaccine while others have resumed inoculations, as investigations into reports of rare, and sometimes severe, blood clots continue. On March 18, the UK medicines regulator said that there had been 5 cases of a rare brain blood clot among 11 million administered shots. On Thursday, it put the count at 22 reports of cerebral venous sinus thrombosis, an extremely rare brain clotting ailment, and 8 reports of other clotting events associated with low blood platelets out of a total of 18.1 million doses given. U.S. to brief Japan. South Korea on North Korea review. Washington, the United States will brief South Korea and Japan on Friday on President Joe Biden's long-awaited review of North Korea policy and talks on Friday that will also cover concerns about a shortage of semiconductor chips, a senior administration official said on Thursday. Biden's national security advisor, Jake Sullivan, will hold a full day of talks with his Japanese counterpart, Shigeru Kitamura, and South Korea's national security advisor, Soo Hoon, at the U.S. Naval Academy in Annapolis, Maryland. It will be the most senior-level meeting between the three allies since Biden took power on January 20 and comes against a backdrop of rising tensions after North Korean missile launches last week. Biden said last week the United States remained open to diplomacy with North Korea despite its ballistic missile tests, but warned there would be responses if North Korea escalates matters. The senior administration official said the Annapolis talks would include discussion of the missile launches, the extent of coronavirus infections within North Korea, and recent diplomacy between Pyongyang and its main ally, China. The primary goal is to ensure that we have a deep, shared understanding of circumstances that are taking place on the peninsula, in North Korea, he told reporters, noting that some reports indicated North Korea has been on a total lockdown due to the pandemic. The White House has shared little about its review of policy toward North Korea and whether it will offer concessions to get Pyongyang to the negotiating table to discuss giving up its nuclear weapons. However, State Department spokesman Ned Price said on Thursday that denuclearization would remain at the center of policy and any approach to Pyongyang will have to be done in lockstep with close allies, including Japan and South Korea. Biden's predecessor, Republican Donald Trump, held 3 meetings with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un but achieved no breakthrough other than a pause in nuclear and intercontinental ballistic tests. Biden, a Democrat, has sought to engage North Korea in dialogue but has been rebuffed so far. Pyongyang, which has long sought a lifting of international sanctions over its weapons programs, said last week the Biden administration had taken a wrong first step and revealed deep-seated hostility by criticizing what it called self-defensive missile tests. The U.S. official said the North Korea review was in its final stages, and we're prepared now to have some final consultations with Japan and South Korea as we go forward. Joseph Yun, who was the U.S. Special Envoy for North Korea under both former President Barack Obama and under Trump, said the policy options were obvious: you want denuclearization and you want to use your sanctions to get to denuclearization. But how to make the first step, so that at least North Korea is persuaded not to do anything provocative? That's the challenge, he said. Some proponents of dialogue are concerned that the Biden administration has not highlighted a broad agreement between Trump and Kim at their first meeting in Singapore in 2018, and warn this could make it difficult to build trust. Asked whether that agreement still stood, the official said, "I understand the significance of the Singapore agreement, and will have more to say in the next couple of days." The 3 officials are also expected to discuss a global shortage of semiconductor chips that has forced U.S. automakers and other manufacturers to cut production. The shortage stems from a confluence of factors as car makers, which shut plants during the COVID-19 pandemic last year, compete against the sprawling consumer electronics industry for chip supplies. It would be fair to say our 3 countries hold many of the keys to the future of semiconductors manufacturing technology, and we will seek to affirm the importance of keeping these sensitive supply chains secure, the official said. Suspected Italian spy gave Russia highly confidential material, source. Italian police have found a stash of classified and highly classified military documents they believe an Italian Navy captain gave to a Russian official in return for cash, a judicial source said on Friday. Walter B.O., 54, was arrested on Tuesday in a Rome car park. A police source said he had been seen handing information to a Russian military attaché in exchange for €5,000, $5,900. The judicial source with access to the case file said police had recovered a memory card containing 181 photos classified as confidential, 9 classified as highly confidential and 47 classified as secret documents from NATO. B.O.'s lawyer Roberto De Vita told an Italian newspaper that his client had told him that he had handed over information to Russia for money, but denied having leaked classified documents. B.O. appeared in court for the first time on Thursday but declined to speak. He asked for time to collect his thoughts, De Vita told reporters. Interviewed later by Corriere della Sera newspaper, De Vita said that B.O. had told him he was not ideologically driven and had never handed over documents which could put Italy or other countries at risk. Italy, which has traditionally enjoyed better relations with Moscow than many other Western states, has expelled 2 Russian diplomats in retaliation and denounced the alleged espionage as a hostile act. The Russian Foreign Ministry was quoted as saying on Wednesday that it regretted the expulsions, but that they did not threaten bilateral relations. Financial troubles. B.O.'s lawyer said his client had 4 children, one of whom was seriously ill and needed special care. "I have made a mistake, but I did it for my family. I had a moment of great weakness and fragility. I was involved in a mechanism that was bigger than me. I had a debt that I could not repay," De Vita quoted him as saying. De Vita did not immediately respond to a request by Reuters for further comment. B.O. is being held in a Rome jail and has been denied house arrest. He faces a minimum 15 years in prison if found guilty of military espionage. B.O.'s wife, Claudia Carbonara, told Corriere della Sera that the family was struggling to get by on his salary of €3,000 a month, with expenses including €1,200 a month on their mortgage. "He is not stupid or irresponsible. He was just desperate," she was quoted as saying. Contacted by Reuters, Carbonara declined to comment. B.O. has the rank of a frigate captain and had a desk job since 2010. He was currently working at the Defense Ministry Department tasked with developing national security policy. The Russian official who was seized on Tuesday left Rome on Thursday along with an embassy colleague, a diplomatic source said. Both men worked in the military attaché's office at the Rome embassy. The Italian media named them as Dmitry Ostrukov and Alexei Nemudrov. Russian authorities have not released their names. Taiwan train derails. At least 4 dead, many injured. Taipei train derailed in a tunnel in eastern Taiwan on Friday after apparently hitting a truck, with at least 4 people feared dead and more than 20 injured, as rescuers struggled to reach crushed carriages, the fire department said. The train, traveling to Taitung, came off the rails in a tunnel just north of Hualien, causing some carriages to hit the wall of the tunnel, the fire department said in a statement. At least 4 people are believed dead, 3 people with serious injuries have been sent to hospital and around 20 with light injuries are waiting to go to hospital, it said. The train was carrying around 350 people, and rescue efforts are ongoing, the department said. Between 80 to 100 people have been evacuated from the first 4 carriages of the train, while carriages 5 to 8 have deformed and are hard to gain access to, it added. Is everyone out in carriage 4? A lady is heard shouting from inside the tunnel, in images provided by the fire department. The official Central News Agency said a truck that was not parked properly was suspected of sliding into the path of the train. The fire department showed a picture of what appeared to be the truck's wreckage lying next to part of the derailed train. The front part of the train was situated outside the tunnel, and those in carriages still in the tunnel were being led to safety, Taiwan's Railway Administration said. Images of the crash scene show carriages inside the tunnel crumbled and ripped apart from the impact, passengers gathering suitcases and bags in a tilted, derailed carriage and others walking along the tracks littered with wreckage. The accident occurred at the start of a long weekend for the traditional tomb sweeping day. Taiwan's mountainous east coast is a popular tourist destination. In 2018, 18 people died and 175 were injured when a train derailed in northeastern Taiwan, in the island's worst rail disaster in more than 3 decades. Don't forget to comment below with your common sense and subscribe to your podcast. This helps bring the podcast to life and grow it. You can follow us on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. We can't wait to continue this adventure with you. Support us on PayPal. Thank you very much and enjoy listening.